All right, we're live. Our first virtual podcast of season 3.
I know.
We're doing this as a phone in because this guy's so special and so important and so busy.
Yeah,
We
he
can't
is.
even get him in person. We're so happy to have Jeff Adler from Gallo Wines
Yeah, thanks,
today on the
Jeff.
podcast.
What's up,
So
TJ?
honored.
How are you guys?
Honored. Oh, we're good. Honored to have you, man.
I'm excited
Yeah.
to be here. I would prefer to be in person. I'm sorry about that. I love Nashville. I would love to be up there with you guys. Atlanta's great, but Nashville's something special.
Yeah. Well, we were thinking of all the people that we could have on the podcast. And when we met you in person, we've met you a few times, but I was like, man, his personality, the way he is just so enthusiastic about wine and your love for wine and education wise, you're just brilliant. I was like, he would be a phenomenal guest to have on the podcast. So thank you for doing this. We appreciate it.
Yeah, same.
I appreciate the opportunity. Some would say I have a face for radio, and I'm okay with that. But I like wine. I like to entertain.
Yeah. Well, why don't we just get into why don't you tell us about yourself and kind of how you got involved in the wine world?
Yeah, sure. So Jeff Adler, business development manager of Georgia for Gallo On Premise Wine. That basically means I'm the state manager for all things wine in the on-premise segment. On-premise is defined as hotels, golf courses, bars, and restaurants. I've been with Gallo for almost 7 years now. And previous to that, I was with our local distributor here, Empire, who has a footprint in 4 states, and they're pretty good at what they do. I was there for 14 years or so. So all in with tenure, I've been at Gallo 20 years this month, last week.
Wow. Congrats.
Previous to that was in the restaurant space and bartender and key employee, and basically through college found that the way to put myself through college.
Wow.
And went to the University of Georgia. Go Dogs. I know you guys have a lot of Vols in your audience. I'm sorry. You guys had our number, including this year. So not mad at it.
Yeah.
Nice. So when did you feel like the moment was though that you were like, okay, wine is like the thing? Like what age were you and like where were you at? Where you were like, this is what I want like to pursue in my life?
Yeah, great call. I was 28, and there were 2 things. Number one, I was at a wedding, and the drink options weren't the best. But at 28, I wasn't really drinking wine quite yet. So that night I was like, I kind of like this. And at 28 also, I had my first child, and she was about, maybe 6 months old at the time. And I realized when I was bartending that I was having a great time, never wanted to leave, making good money, meeting good people. Life was kind of easy, but I didn't want to be an old bartender. So it was the combination of that wedding and me realizing that I couldn't bartend forever that just put it together. And so when I was bartending, I was also creating the wine list, tasting for the wine list, designing inventory, pricing, etc. And I had good relationships with all my local distributors. And so I reached out, and the very first one I reached out to said, you seem like a natural fit. And when we get an open territory, typically we'll get 300 resumes. So if you're interested, we want to talk to you. And that was it. That happened basically in person with my rep in December 20 some years ago. And then over the phone at the same bar about a week later, phone call, hey, do you want this? I took it.
Wow.
So first 6 months were tough. It's really a steep learning curve to go from bartending to being in distribution world. So much so my wife was like, hey, you can't do this. Like your paychecks are not good. We can't sustain life. And I knew I didn't want to go back to the bar. So I leaned in and I hustled and I worked harder than I ever had before. And really those 6 months, like I said, learning curve. And then there were a few more learning curves, but man, I ended up getting the hang of it and never wanted to leave. So there was this weight off my shoulders, all at age 28, that spoke to this is what you're going to do for the rest of your life, whether it's in Georgia or really across the world.
Mm-hmm. What do you account that you did in that moment where you're like, this is all or nothing, I'm going to make this work? What can you pinpoint kind of the things that you implemented to make it work? I mean, obviously there's some, things that happened, but what did you do personally that was like, I'm going to make this work?
Frankly, it was something that I've had my entire life. One of my mantras has been, you get out what you put in. So I just decided to work harder. anytime I'm feeling down or something's not working right, or I need to reinvent myself, I just work harder. I mean, I lean in, I analyze, I inspect, and I just don't give up. I don't want to give up. I want to keep going, keep grabbing for more.
That's cool. That's good. Words to live by.
Words to live by. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty inspirational. I kind of think like when you look at these people that have like just pushed forward in life, it's the ones that are like, yeah, it's gonna be a lot of work. And like all the people in my life that I've really looked up to, it's like, I just don't think like everything's handed to you. Like, I really think true success takes work. I do, like real success. And also feeling like success mentally and like as an individually, I think takes work. I don't think you just get that. So that's a very cool story. And yeah, and that your wife was just like, hey, like this isn't gonna work. And you're like, I'm gonna make it work.
Another choice. So I'm on the recruiting team for Gallo here locally. So we have a bunch of recruiting teams across the country, and I recruited the University of Georgia, as one would expect. And like the thing that we look for in our 21, 22-year-olds who are newly going to graduate is grit. It's a combination of like hustle and lean in and drive and accomplishments. It is something that you can't truly define, but you can see it in the right candidates. Do you have grit? And frankly, I think that's what I've had my entire life, just from both mom and dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
That's awesome.
Do you remember the first wine that you ever tried?
Oh, yeah.
That got you into wine? What was your first?
You know,
It's okay if it was bad.
Yeah, it's always bad, probably.
you know, I tried so many along the way. I'm trying to think if there was a memorable one. I remember my first beer. It was Miller Lite when I was 18 or 19. Might have to edit that part out. And I didn't like it. My first wine probably was something sweet. Like I remember White Zinfandel and Riesling. And, you know, I think that's the evolution of palate is when you're younger, you like stuff like that. And then you kind of go out of it. Black Opal was like a Shiraz.
Oh, yeah.
That was kind of in the mix there. Wild Horse back in the day, the Pinot Noir post-movie Sideways, Estancia, Franciscan. There were lots of things 20 years ago that were important in my life. And then as we age, you get a palate and a taste for the finer things. And so now I can speak on all the things that are high end that my palate gravitates a little bit more to these days.
Yeah. Mine was Behringer Old Vines Inn.
Behringer.
Knew nothing about wine. Asked the sales clerk, and he was like, "Try this." That's what started.
I think mine was just like Franzia, but yeah, which is horrible.
Franzia.
Yeah.
That's something that Gallos have been known for, was like jug wine and box wine. So Franzia, likely we sell a lot of those boxes, and there's a huge part of the population that looks forward to consuming stuff like that, right? Whether it's a financial or an age limitation, those wines get the job done.
I like that perspective. That's good. Wine's for everybody.
So for people that aren't familiar with Gallo, can you kind of share what Gallo is, what you guys do, what you're a part of?
It's great to work here. The company is greener than I ever would imagine, like both from like an evergreen perspective and kind of what we do behind the scenes. So Gallo dates back to, let's start in 1933, even though we go back further than that. 1933 was the end of Prohibition. So we were doing a lot of things pre-Prohibition. During Prohibition, we were one of only 3 wineries allowed to make wine, which was kind of cool for sacramental use. And then after Prohibition, in 1933, we raised our hand the summer of, we could see Prohibition was coming to an end. And then we started getting what we need, documentation. We had places, we had vines, we had our ducks in a row basically to start producing. So flash forward to today, there's been a lot of things happen, and obviously a lot of innovation, a lot of new brands. Gallo is the largest winery in the world, which is something that I'm so proud to say. We also are family owned, which is also a pretty great thing to say. There's no board or controlling regulators who tell us how much, when, or how much. We kind of get to do what we want. I have people with the last name Gallo on my phone, so if I needed help, I could reach out. So it's just so fulfilling to work for this company and with innovation and change and all the things that we have planned for the future.
That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah, I actually had no idea about that like the Prohibition and that like one of the largest in the world, you said.
Now we are. And now
Yeah.
post-prohibition, right?
Right.
It was wide open space. It was a land grab. Who was going to be out there and dominate and work hard? We at Louis Martini, which we'll talk about in a bit, Cellar 254 is a part of what we do. And that really kind of speaks back to one of the first producing licenses that we had that was just almost in the single digits in California post-prohibition. And now there are a whole bunch, in the thousands, of bonded wineries in California.
Wow. That's amazing.
Mm.
Cool that like you're also like working with a company that's like a big piece of history too.
Mhm.
I love history. So
There's so much. We have a whole archive room in Modesto, which is kind of our home base, that has all the things that I love. But, there's never time as a salesperson to go out there and spend time looking through the archives. But Gallo goes deep, almost 100 years now. 2033, we'll celebrate our 100th. There's a lot of history. And, our parents and our grandparents know of Gallo. Pretty much most of the world has heard of Gallo.
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Huge. Wow. Okay. So we are having a taste test. We have 3 wines from Gallo that you nicely sent us. And so I think we're going to start off with Rombauer Vineyards.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us about this one.
This is our newest acquisition. This was summer of 2023. Came out, hit the presses. And so I guess backing it up a little bit, like Gallo, we're on 5th generation now. The guys, obviously, since 1933, we can't go anywhere, right? Because we are family owned. There's no selling. There's no getting out. Once you're in, which means that basically a lot of our land has been paid for a while. So we are in a good spot to look at some of these companies. Rombauer started in 1980, who may want out. We're finding in California, and you can read articles out there, that the second generation family members sometimes don't want a piece of what their parents or grandparents were doing. So it puts us in a great spot. That's where I think Rombauer comes into the fold. And in California, there's a ton of symbiosis. Everybody is friends with neighbors because we talk about viticultural practices and fruit pricing and buying fruit, using facilities, etc. So there is a lot of synergy in California. And so basically, I think our family has known these guys for a long time. But a year and a half in, excited to have this brand. This is cool stuff. I did not want to miss tasting this today. We had in the Georgia market just last week, a couple of days ago, we had Joe Coughlin, one of our Rombauer winemakers. And so I got to spend a lot of time in the car talking about tasting and really leaning into what is Rombauer. This is one of the best selling premium Chardonnays that there is in the U.S. domestic market. It is known for a certain style. And I'll be honest, when we first purchased this, I went out the day of, or maybe the next day, with another work colleague, and we bought a bottle of this wine because we were hoping to poke holes in the quality of this wine. We sat down at a bar, had a couple glasses, and we were both at the same time looked at each other and very pleasantly happy, surprised, excited that this wine tasted as good as it does. It is obviously, it's a big Chardonnay. There's a lot of oak. There's a lot of malolactic fermentation, which we call cream or butter. But most importantly, this wine has acid. Acid is what you need to maintain the structure of a wine, no matter red or white. Acid helps wine work and go with food. Anytime you take a bite of food, there's inherently fat left on your tongue. Acid in a wine binds with that fat, strips it clean. So in essence, you get a fresh taste every single time.
Wow. We got to try this.
Well, I kind of already did.
Oh, you've been cheating.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
The Rombauer Chardonnay, this is a combination of French and American oak. We have our own special cooper who does barrels for us. We have our own special toast level, which will be different pretty much in every Chardonnay. We have our own special yeasts. This wine sits on the lees for almost a year, and it's stirred by hand daily, which is a big part of who we are in the Chardonnay. It takes a lot. We have a team of basically lee stirrers throughout let's say this is 10 months in oak. I don't know the exact time. But they'll go through every single day, and they'll start at the beginning, and through the thousands of barrels, they will stir the lees and get these old spent yeast cells going. And by the end of the week, they have finished the entire barrel room, and they'll start over and do it again next week.
Wow.
So
That's crazy.
and touch when it comes to this Chardonnay.
Yeah. I think you taste it when you try this wine. This is delicious.
Yeah, actually, like I'm not normally a fan of like buttery or oaky shards, and I'm wondering it's just because I've maybe had some that aren't so well balanced. Because I really enjoy this, and I do get the acidity, like you're saying, but I'm not like having it and being like I'm not getting this, blow to my face of like oak or butter. It's like just really well balanced, and it's light. It's not like, and even in the color, I mean, it's really light too. But it doesn't make me feel heavy. Like you say, it's a really big shard, and it is, but I'm like, I don't feel heavy drinking it. And I do think it's probably like that balance of acidity that you're talking about. And I'm like, oh, like I actually really enjoy this. So it's changing my mind.
Thank you. We hear that from a lot of folks. It's like, wow, we didn't think that we would like this style. And to your point a minute ago, it is absolutely acid. If you don't have acid in here, the wines get out of whack. If it's too much oak or if it's too much mallow, without the center strain of acid, the wine becomes flabby and you lose consumers. This one, again, it was special to us a year and a half ago when I went to purposely find a flaw in this wine. And this is just one of the 9 wines that we bring to Georgia market. Like the Sauvignon Blanc is delicious. And that's kind of what's next in what we talk about from Rombauer. The Zinfandel happens to be my favorite wine. So I was at a tasting of mostly Cabernets a few weeks ago. And the Zinfandel played second fiddle to all the Cabernets that sold. I think my guy sold about 30 boxes of Cabernet, and he also sold 7 boxes of Zinfandel to Cabernet collectors. So it was a really good showing. I really like the Zinfandel. So that'll be a common theme to my speaking today is liking of Zinfandel.
Yeah. Well, obviously being, in the wine business and knowing I feel like the Rombauer has just like a solid following.
Oh, yeah.
Like being from I've always heard of Rombauer, the Rombauer Shard, people asking for Rombauer Shard. So you guys to get this
Huge.
and huge,
Very cool.
Man. And just after trying it, I see why the fan base is so large.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Totally.
And people can find this everywhere pretty much, right?
We only make X amount of cases. And so it's not a humongous number. It is, it's available for the most part. Let's say 11 out of 12 months out of the year, right? Kind of like Chick-fil-A being closed on Sunday. We're going to run into times to where it's not always available, but hopefully the way that we do things, it'll be there the next week or the week after. So it is basically, it's allocated per state. Yeah. And, but for the most part, the Chardonnay we try to keep on shelves.
We do have it here in Nashville, right?
We do, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's it kind of retail for? I know it's ballpark.
It sits in that. Let's call it $50. I think it's $49 on shelf.
Okay.
Awesome wine for $50.
Worth it.
Yeah, worth it. Totally worth it.
It's so good.
Definitely. Find Rombauer out there and try it if you want a delicious.
And we're gonna
Shard.
post pictures and all of that, so like
unbelievable.
Y'all can see the labels because that's how everybody finds the wine is the labels.
All right.
You want to get into the next one?
Next one. What'd you pick for us?
Another one of my favorites, another wine that we talk a lot about is Orin Swift. And we partnered with Dave Finney, right? Dave Finney's the winemaker. Orin Swift is the brand. And we can tell you about that if you guys want here in a second. But we partnered officially with Dave Finney in 2016. And he has been the winemaker ever since and actually has just signed on for another contract. So he's not going anywhere. There's a famous quote, not famous, it's on the internet. You can find it, where he basically is being interviewed and he says he feels like he's pregnant with twins. And he defined that as to say 2 things. Number 1, I'm just getting started. And number 2, you guys got me for 20 years. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not saying that 20 years is the length, but we're excited to have Orin Swift. And this is the Abstract. Abstract is a red blend that is Grenache, Syrah, and Petite Syrah. And every now and then they'll blend in Zinfandel or Cab, depending on vintage. The label is kind of cool too, as you have probably noticed. It's a mosaic, a collage of a bunch of different articles. And so Dave Finney really traveled the world, or still does, and makes wine on a lot of different continents. And when you travel as much as Dave does, you're in the airplane a lot. You've seen all the movies, you've done all the Sudoku. You're kind of bored. And so before each flight, he would pop into one of the local news stores and buy a stack of magazines, and typically National Geographic. And anything that spoke to him, he would rip that article out and put it in his suit pocket, and took it back to his winery and worked on it for a couple of weeks, maybe months, until he had it organized on the floor in a really large setting. And that's what he went with. And it was basically two people at the winery at that point. They took a picture of it and they rolled with it. And for the most part, we did fine for the first couple months. And then we got our hand slapped. We got a cease and desist letter from the Rolling Stones folks who said, hey, you can't do what you're doing. Your lips they were in the bottom right corner down here. We had the Rolling Stones lips. You can't use that because we still have that in our trademark. And so we learned a little bit about trademark law when we first went to press with this. But it was good press for us because Dave had invented this little wine called The Prisoner and sold The Prisoner in 2008. So this is what was next for him. And everyone wondered what happened to the winemaker for The Prisoner. Well, now he's on to Orrin Swift. Orrin is Dave's dad's middle name. Swift is his mom's maiden name. So the Orrin Swift Wine Company was born in the early 00s when Dave knew that maybe there was a life cycle end to The Prisoner and he needed something next. And so this is what was next.
Oh, that's cool. Now, I think we were sent the 8 years in the desert.
Well, we can do that too if you want me to.
Yeah, tell us about that one as well. Abstract sounds amazing.
I think I've actually had Abstract.
I think I have too.
No, I think when we went to the
Miami.
Yeah.
Yep.
We tried it.
Yep.
And it was amazing.
So it plays perfectly into the story I just told, right? When he sold The Prisoner brand in 2008 to a Mexican holding company who later sold it 2 years later to Constellation, who still owns it. In 2008, they made him sign a non-compete clause that said, you won't touch your baby, Zinfandel, for 8 years. And so it went from 2008 till 2016 when we debuted 8 years in the desert, where he was banished from playing with his favorite grape, making wine. And we released an 8-pack that had 8 different labels, and it was about $800 of the new iteration, or, Prisoner 2.0, right? Had nothing to do with Prisoner, but this is Dave, the original winemaker, now doing the same sort of Zinfandel style blend, but now for Orrin Swift. So we're in vintage 22, 23, depending on what market you're in now. The label has remained different for every vintage since we launched in 16, but it is very similar to the original blend, which was Zinfandel, Syrah, and Grenache. It's Zinfandel heavy, about 2/3. The oak is French oak. We get about 8 to 9 months out of that at about 1/3 new, plus or minus. Big fruit flavors, a little zing, a little zip. Zinfandel, you need a little extra time in the vineyard to ripen it up. And so that's typically one of the last red grapes that's brought in from harvest. And to get it to the ideal ripeness, you're going to have extra sugar levels. And so extra sugar levels, when you go to make wine, result in extra alcohol. So typically Zinfandels will have more legs, right? When you swirl the glass and you see those streamers, that's an indication of an elevated alcohol level in wine. And that's just inherent to Zinfandel grape itself.
Yeah. It's so good.
We've tried a lot of Orrin Swift wines. Obviously, the wine is delicious, but I love their labels too. I think their labels stand out. They draw you in to make you want to find out what's in the bottle. So always been a fan of Orrin Swift. I've never had 8 years in the desert though, and this thing is phenomenal.
So good.
Nice big bold red.
What would you food-wise pair with this wine?
It's a porch pounder, so you don't necessarily need food. But guess what? It has acid in it as well. So I like barbecue, right? It's hard to always pair barbecue the right way, but you could have brisket in this wine because there's inherent spice and kind of fattiness in brisket. The acid in this wine is going to pull that all together.
Oh yeah, that sounds awesome.
Labels. It is there's marketing out there that it says that when 50% of people walk down the wine aisle, they don't know what wine they're going to buy. So labels are so important in what we do. There's 9 SKUs that come through with Orrin Swift to both Tennessee and Georgia markets. And labels need to grab somebody, right? They need to pop off of the shelf. They need to speak a language that is subliminal to the purchaser saying, hey, look, you should probably want to join me. So our labels are some of the best sizzle stories that we have for Orrin Swift and some wine dinners and just There's more, right? We could have a whole podcast dedicated to only Orin Swift.
Yeah, definitely. So you're a good wine educator. How do you break that reluctancy for people to dive into a wine? If they're shopping in the wine aisle, like there's so much out there, names and things can be so intimidating. How do you think people should really find their wine?
I try to make everything that I do non-pretentious. When I was coming up as a wine buyer, there was a lot of pretentiousness in folks that I had to deal with, and it just didn't make me feel good. And so forever, I decided when I go to market, I'm going to remove the mystique of kind of what is a wine person. And I want to be just approachable and accessible to everybody, from the dishwasher to the 18-year-old who's not allowed to drink but is learning or wants to. And so I make it about you, the buyer, the person on the other end of it. It's not about what I like or the expectations that I have. It's what do you want? What are your styles? What do you want to know? Like, and then you give me a little bit, and then I'm going to tell you what I think works.
Yeah. Because there's so much out there. I mean, and that's the thing, is finding what people want and not making them feel bad because they like a sweeter wine, or they like, XYZ, a fruitier wine, or what have you.
Yeah, not to be like, oh, that's gross that you like that.
Right. Yeah, because the wine world could be so pretentious and so snooty, and I think that's why we fell in love with you and your approach to wine is just like, there's something out there for everybody, and just because you like something, don't be ashamed of that. Dive into it, and your palate evolves over time and changes and grows, and what you like 5 years from now might be different.
Absolutely. Yes. There's so much change. There's so many new things, right? You have to innovate to keep going. Let's make it fun.
Yeah, for sure.
With the wine world and the whole alcohol beverage world kind of, taking a little hit and sales are down and stuff like that. What do you feel like is the approach, being on your end of things, as far as like gaining new consumers and kind of keeping the category strong?
There's different brackets of age groups that we look at. And so right now, a lot of our marketing focus and look is kind of how do we engage the 21 to 28-year-old consumer, because that group has different thoughts when it comes to wine consumption, alcohol consumption. And then, we have different consumption compared to our parents. And so right now it has to be fun, vibrant, and have a, sometimes an earthy or a good feel to it. There's touch points that make sense for certain demographics, but it's how do we get the next age group of drinkers to carry on with kind of what we're doing today, right? Does wine change in 10 or 15 years? Does it look different than it does now? It's hard to pinpoint and put a finger on that. But also, a lot of it comes down to trust. Consumers, when they look at a wine list or they walk down a retail aisle, there has to be some familiarity with what they see and what they know. Because if I can't trust the shop that I'm in, I don't know how I feel about going back there. Specifically in this climate where we hold on to a little bit more dollars right now than we normally do. It's been a tough year. 2024, we have been down. We were forecasted to be down 2.4% across the country. We ended up being down a little bit more than that. We are forecasting a better year for next year. So I think that innovation to keep new drinkers in space and to keep them from going to, let's say, spirits or cannabis or online gambling, and then familiarity. You have to kind of feel good about where you're going to spend those dollars.
Yeah. So what does Gallo have for the 21 to 28-year-olds that you can promote?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that question.
Never mind.
I just don't know exactly what they are, right? We have one called Lolly, Loli, which I think that is a sweet red that you guys mentioned a minute ago. It's got some exciting, bright, vibrant labels. I haven't held a bottle yet, so I don't know. And then we have one new that's called Icon. That's mostly a retail play right now. And there's a competitor. Actually, the first time I saw it was up in Nashville a couple of months ago, called XXL. And so in the retail space right now, consumers are buying high alcohol, sweet wines. They're looking for bang for buck. It was our Taylor Ports just within the last 18 months. And Cardi B put it in one of her tweets, and I think she rapped about it as well. So a lot of folks were drinking our Taylor Ports for a while, basically a little higher on the alcohol level, a sweetness. And so, one bottle or one liter size serving could get it done for you. So it's been a constant evolution. And right now, sub 30, I could tell you that High Noon from Gallo is working exceptionally well. And that's what I drink, and that's kind of what I encourage. I have a daughter who's 21, so we consume High Noon a little bit here and there. Pink Whitney for us kind of points into that sub 30 drinking age right now as well. So there's lots more that I'm sure I'm forgetting.
Yeah, good. All right. Good education. So third and final one that we got. We're fans of this one already. You can sell others if they haven't tried it. I want you to tell them all about this because this is a phenomenal Cabernet Sauvignon.
This is this is kind of one of my passion points when it comes to winery in California is Louis Martini. And when I mentioned earlier that during Prohibition, there were only 3 wineries making wine during Prohibition for sacramental use. Louis Martini was one of them, which is kind of cool. We were also making like grape bricks that we would sell to our grandparents that would go to their address, let's say in New York, and it would say, do not add this much water, do not heat to this temperature, or else you might get wine. And so we kind of not only made wine for sacramental use, but we, basically underground helped support winemaking across the country. So to each their own for home batching. But Louis Martini has evolved big time over the years. And in 2019, we completed a restoration of winery, and it is absolutely gorgeous. It speaks to history and it speaks to modernism. So I have consumers all the time, Jeff, we're going to California, we're going to all these cool places, what would you suggest? And I say, I'm not even going to suggest it. I'm going to demand that you go here because you're going to love it. It is gorgeous. It is pretty. It is so nice in Napa Valley that the publication magazines based in Napa Valley have had a lot of events here because we have the space, and it's such a nice time. It's pretty. We have a cellar, a basement, if you will, where you can have a table for, let's say, 20. And some of the food and service and wine pairings rival some of the very best restaurants in Napa Valley. Our grounds are gorgeous. We have a huge chef's kitchen outdoors. There are cabanas and fire pits and string lights. You'll find it on some of my Instagram postings over the last few years. It is just, I'm in love with what we do here. We also have some primo land, some primo grapes. Our sommelier team went to our winemaking team in 2017-18, and we did a couple things. And one of the first things we did was said we need to back down some of the sweetness. So Petit Syrah levels kind of dropped, Cabernet levels went up, and then we need to increase some of our oak. So this wine right here retails on a shelf for, let's say, that $49.99 price. Also is bang for buck Napa Valley. When I go to my restaurateurs in Georgia, I ask them for that $75 to $85 by the bottle placement on their list because this wine gets it done, right? This is, talk about 1933 and really before, there is so much history here built up in Louis Martini. It predates so many of the other Napa Valley great producers that are out there right now.
Thing we love about this wine, so well structured, like just well balanced. It's not one of those overly like crazy cabs that you're going to get. Like it's just, you just want to keep revisiting it and drinking it. And this is a huge favorite of ours. So when we saw this on your list, we were excited.
So excited.
We're already fans of it.
And actually going back to like, I think when I was first introduced, like this is a real story too. When I was first introduced to like wine at like a higher level, my father used to buy this, like when he had like, a special event or something. This was the wine that he would buy. Like I remember him getting it like for him and my mom on their anniversary. And like, he let me try it when I was like probably 17 or something like that. And I was just like, oh, wow. And I liked it then too, even though like, I know we say like younger people, like, a sweeter palate. I remember like, I think it was also just like it being my dad, like, this is important wine. This like is
a big deal.
It was such a huge deal to even try it. Yeah. Even still to this day, he'll get it for like special times. So it's a special wine, and it has a place in my heart for sure. Yeah.
So this is a 2019 vintage. Is this kind of what people can get out there in on-premise, off-premise world?
It depends on what market you are.
Yeah.
19 is pretty commonplace.
Okay.
It won't be long until we're rolling to 21, and that may be soon. But You guys know that there were some issues, or if you don't, there was a huge fire in Napa in 2020. And let's say there's about 50,000 planted acres. I think it actually numbers 54 now. But that fire, called the Glass Mountain Fire, affected 39,000 of those acres. And so it was hard in 2020 to put out a Cabernet from Napa Valley, particularly the northern part of Napa Valley, which is most of the mountain fruit and some of the expensive vineyards that sit up in the north side of Napa.
Wow. Yeah, that fire did a lot of damage. So
I know we've talked to like so
Yeah.
many people.
Yeah.
Can't believe which is I guess common out there, but
so like going off of what you just said, so 2020 was kind of non-existent. Like from a business standpoint, you're counting on that vintage,
Mhm.
as a business and, in the vineyard and everything. What happens to that? I mean, do you just kind of hit the pause button and it's not available for a certain amount of time and we're just kind of rebuilding it?
Yeah, unfortunately, there are 19 producers out of business, which is
Oh my
just
gosh.
unfortunate, right? Some really great wineries. Because if you're a smaller winery, you can't really forecast or hedge for that, right? That is a significant blow to what you do on a year over year. So being big like us, we looked other places, right? So Napa for us wasn't really it's a revenue generator for the 2020. But we'll look to some of our spirits and then obviously Sonoma and some of the other counties. But for those poor 19 producers, it's hard. And it's constant. Fires aren't going away in California. If anything, they're going to get worse. It's so hard to hedge against that. So hopefully you don't close up doors, and it sucks that if you do.
Yeah, that's really sad and difficult. Well, that's why we drink wine, right?
Yes. I mean, gotta definitely keep helping support the people that are continuing to try to do it, but we feel that's awful. Like I feel so sad for like all those businesses and all those peoples. And it seems like that is like a very common thing that happens out there. I've never lived in California. I've actually never visited, but just we hear the stories and just the devastation that's happened to people. And yeah, like this is your whole life. And I think you could drink wine and be like, oh, wow, yeah, I'm drinking wine. It's like, you don't know how much goes into this wine. Like we talk about that over and over and over again, like how much goes into just making just this. And it's a lot of work. It's farming. It is farming. It's farm work.
California's dry, right? That's what makes vinifera or grapes so awesome is that basically, let's say from March 1 till October 1 on average, it's basically blue skies, low humidity, and it's gorgeous. But it's super dry also. So you need that snow melt and that ice pack during the winter to sustain water for the rest of the year. But if you get that dry, you have kindling everywhere and trees down, limbs and brush and one little fire, and then the wind starts. And the wind is really what pushes it to the next level. So, there's no break for that. You can't subscribe or ask for more rain and that you'll get, and then the wind isn't going to slow down either.
Do you feel like, because you were saying the fires are just going to keep getting worse. Like, do you think people are looking at land in other places where like this isn't a problem as much? And obviously the terroir will change, so you can't make exactly what you're making, but maybe they're all thinking innovation wise, I might need to be doing something totally different than I was before because this is just becoming too big of a problem.
Absolutely. I think that we've been doing this or looking elsewhere for probably 30 or 40 years now, right? Forecasting what's going to be the next terroir-driven microclimate where I can grow grapes is hard to do because it's a crapshoot. We don't know how is it going to look in 20 or 30 years. Is it going to be too hot, too dry, too arid in Napa? And so I think that there's a lot of people who are looking just north of Napa, which is Mendocino, but there's no telling. Who knows? So I think that they've been thinking about that for a while. Oddly enough, China has some production areas right now that might come online in the next 20 years and be as good or just as good as some of the major wine producing areas throughout the world now. So it takes a really special microclimate terroir to be able to do what Napa Valley does.
Is Gallo pretty much in California, or are there other vineyards across the country? Or
we're based in Modesto, which is south of Sacramento, an hour and a half or two. It's an old farming region, and that's home base. North Coast is big for us, which is Napa, Sonoma. We do have wineries in New York. That was part of our Constellation acquisition 3 years ago now in 2021. And then I don't know, but I'm sure that we own land in other states where we have grapes. I know that we've been in Washington and out of Washington, so I'm sure that we still own land in a couple other states.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, as this thing kind of evolves and grows, just I feel like around the United States, so many different states are popping up with great terroir and places to grow grapes. So it's like maybe, I don't know, maybe that solves the fire problem, but can't beat a California wine. So it's hard to just
Yeah, you
move,
can't just like completely.
Yeah.
It's never going to be the
It's not
same.
going to be the
So
same.
yeah.
Every state in the union produces vinifera, so that's a good thing. But just, I'll use Georgia for example because I'm here. Our summers are always rainy, always hot, always humid, sometimes hail, lots of thunderstorms, and that is not good for grapes. Grapes need to struggle a little bit to be able to produce these amazing qualities and flavors that they have. And struggling basically means looking for water. And in Georgia, they're not looking for water. We have what we need here. So the grapes kind of get fat and lazy and take on a characteristic that is not indicative of good soils, good terroir.
Mm. You've been in Georgia a while?
Been in Georgia since 1990. Was born in
you've
the
been there a long time.
Midwest and then moved here. Dad got a job with the government down in Fort Benning.
So what would be your favorite Georgia winery that you
Because we've been to a lot of Georgia wineries.
Yeah, so that's kind of where we first started, like traveling to Georgia and visiting kind of Georgia wineries. So what would you say people would need to visit? I mean, obviously from Nashville, it's not a far drive to get into,
Or maybe you haven't found one. I don't know.
No, we have probably. So I live north of the city, and then another hour north of me is our mountain region, which is where most of our wineries live. And so Frogtown and Wolf Mountain are two of my favorites, just because I used to sell them when I worked at the wholesaler, and I know them fairly well. And I would even go. I mean, they're both great. I did a harvest at Frogtown. We harvested 2 acres, and that was a lot of work. And the brunch at Wolf Mountain is spectacular. They have this Sunday setting up in the hills, and you go to their back porch, and you can get almost 360-degree views. It's absolutely gorgeous, and I think are Georgia's highest awarded winery, and they're really good at making wine, particularly bubbles, which is hard. There was a point where the winemaker from Wolf Mountain and his daughter was making wine for Chalk Hill in California. And so I did a competitive set tasting. It was brown bag. And in my right hand was the Georgia wine. It was Chardonnay made by dad. Left hand was the California Chardonnay made by daughter. And I had a show of hands who liked the wine on the right and who liked the wine on the left. And the crowd, 75% of the crowd liked the wine on the right, the Georgia wine. And when I took the brown bag off, there was a gasp in the room because people were like, I don't know why I like Georgia wine better than I like Chalk Hill, really nice California wine. So we can do it here. It's just, it's harder than the conditions that we have in California.
Yeah,
for sure. Well, we've been to Wolf Mountain
and Frogtown.
And we had Frogtown on our
podcast.
We had Craig on our podcast. Yeah, we did. And it was a really good time. We've been going there for years. And we've actually been taking people with us and getting to know the winemakers. And we've gotten to know, I don't know if you're familiar with Chateau Alon, but we know Simone really well. And he's the winemaker there. And then our favorite, which we've also had on the podcast, is Crane Creek Vineyards in Young Harris.
I know I've heard of Crane Creek, but I'm not overly familiar.
Yeah, so they're pretty high up there in elevation, and along the Appalachian Trail, and just the story is really cool. Peter, the winemaker, and his wife, him and his wife were living in Nepal doing theater for change, and his father had come back from the war in Italy and started this vineyard in the 90s, and he felt the call to come back and take over the winery, and all of their wines are sitting at like 11-12%. They specialize in like whites and all French American hybrids. We were blown away.
Yeah, doing some real cool stuff. So
yeah,
the thing I think that, especially with Georgia wines and other places that people aren't familiar with, if it's not California, is again breaking that mindset of like there's not good wine unless it comes from California. You know what I mean? And New York's doing some cool stuff. Virginia, as we know. So
I definitely think it's harder.
Yeah,
like
definitely.
Way harder, and it has to like be in the right conditions. Because we've been all over Georgia, and it's you go to some and you're like, oh, they're really just doing the fruit bombs or they're doing this stuff. But then like we've gone to a couple like Crane Creek where we were like, they are they're doing a lot of innovative things that we hadn't really seen anywhere
Yeah.
in this area of the country.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's crazy. Wine's crazy.
It's fun. We're in a good game, right? This is I get to tell my friends that we eat and drink for a living. Obviously, there's way more to it, but this is a great job, and we're in a good industry. And here's to many more years being able to consume and have a good time and share fun times with our friends.
100%.
Definitely.
Okay, well, I get to ask the question before we end it. Another question.
Your question.
Not
There
the
you
same
go.
question. This is a different question. Okay. So, would you, for $2 million, eat bologna sandwiches every meal for 6 months?
Absolutely.
He has no problem.
I thought you were going to say forever, which the answer would have been absolutely not. 6 months, that's that.
What about 2 years?
Yeah.
You don't have any health problems, so you're fine at the end of it.
I mean, I think that as long as you can fry it and add different sauces to it, I'd be okay. I kind of grew up on bologna sandwiches, so yeah, let's go.
You're only allowed to have mustard.
That makes it tough. That makes it tough. I don't know the answer then. 6 months, I'm all in. I have to stew on 2.
I grew up on bologna sandwiches too, and I love them. But I don't know if I could eat them every day for 2 years. I mean, for $2 million,
That's a big
a
commitment.
lot of money though.
You would get so sick of it.
Yeah, but
for 765 days or so.
oh man. Well, thank you so much
Jeff,
for being
this
on
has
the
been so
podcast.
fun. Thank you. Tell people if you want. Do you want people to find you? Tell them where they can find you. I mean, yeah. Tell them all the places where they can search you.
The best spot on Instagram is on Instagram, right? I'm at BroFundMe. It's like GoFundMe, but it's BroFundMe. I'm embarrassed by that name, but I just stuck with it, and here we are.
I like it.
I love the name.
GoFundMe.
Thank you. Yes, it's easy to remember, right? And I'm just hoping that someday somebody reaches out and says, "I want to pay you for your Instagram handle," and then we keep on going.
Just hang on to it till that day comes, man.
Well, that's great. And your portfolio is excellent. And yeah, we're going to post about these wines and just, yeah, if you get your hands on these wines, you're going to be happy because they are all just amazing. And it definitely, just talking to you, you know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think you would behind a product that you did not fully vet and believe in. So it's evident that you're like, no, these are good wines and I know good wine, and you do know good wine. So
definitely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I appreciate you guys having me. I hope there's a future where we can run around the Nashville streets together in the next coming years.
Or even Georgia.
Oh yeah, we might even come down to Georgia and see you.
Yeah, let me know when you guys are down next time. I'm trying to come to Nashville for New Year's Eve, so fingers crossed. We'll see.
Sweet.
All right. Well, cheers.
Well, cheers, my friend. Good to see you.
Yes.
Adam, this has been great.
Awesome.